Welcome to Food and Facilities, an online show for West Coast Industrial Solutions magazine. Our goal is to cultivate knowledge to feed the world by focusing our quarterly trade issues on safety, compliance, and innovation within manufacturing, agriculture, food processing, and food and beverage industries. In this episode, we speak with Safe Food Alliance about the 12 steps of a good HACCP plan, and we speak with Mycokind about how they're looking into changing the food industry with functional, flavorful, fungal foods. Welcome to Food and Facilities. I'm Tara Sweeney with West Coast Industrial Solutions magazine. Today we will be discussing 12 steps to a good HACCP or HACCP plan with John Kimball of Safe Food Alliance. We will also be discussing Mycokind's company profile that they were featured in our July through September quarterly, and we will be discussing that company with co-founders Stephen Young and Hung Duan. Make sure to subscribe at wcismag.com/subscribe to have all safety and compliance news for manufacturing, food and beverage, food processing, and agriculture. And make sure to check out our advertisement options on our website at wcismag.com/advertise. If you caught our last episode, we were with Tim Nightingale of Nightingale Resolutions. He is going to be hosting a Zoom webinar with Fresno State Craig School of Business Institute for Family Business in collaboration with CMTC and San Joaquin Valley Manufacturing Alliance. It'll be Thursday, September 24th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Go to their Eventbrite or check out our social media pages and follow the link to sign up today. And I will be bringing on a video that I pre-recorded with our first guest, John Kimball of Safe Food Alliance. He's a senior food safety manager, and the 12 steps of a good HACCP plan. I'm here with John Kimball of Safe Food Alliance, and we'll be discussing the 12 steps of a good HACCP plan. And John, can you give us a little background about you and Safe Food Alliance?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Tara. It's good to see you again, even in this crazy time with COVID, right? I know we've been at a couple of trade shows together and such, but at least we can Zoom for now and still see each other and connect and do things like this, so that's great. So a little bit about us. Our parent company, DFA of California, is a company that's been around since 1908, which is about the time that food safety kind of started in a regulatory sense here in the US. So our organization has been working with the agri-food industry for many, many years. And we started out kind of inspecting commodities, working with these producers. If you think about it, back in the early 1900s, we didn't even really have lab testing, so to speak, like we do today. Nothing like today's laboratories at all. And so a lot of what was done was kind of hands-on inspecting, looking for mold, looking for insect damage, things like that, and quality attributes that also affect food safety. So then in the 50s, we started our first lab in the Fresno area, and it's recently been moved down to Kingsburg, just a little bit south of Fresno, California. So we also have an office now in Sacramento. That's our corporate office, and a number of other locations. I work out of our Central Valley office in Ceres, California, Modesto area. So I've been with the company 8 years now, actually this month. And so it's kind of hard to believe time really flies, but anyway, just really enjoy working with the food industry and dealing with some of the challenges that people are facing, kind of helping them to understand how to meet customer and regulatory requirements. So that's kind of a little bit about who we are. We also have a certification body that does some of these audits that customers ask for. And myself, I'm directly involved in the training and consulting activities. And so we have a lot of public courses. We do work with clients doing consulting. And our courses are basically all virtual right now. So, really encourage viewers to check out our website and see what we have coming up. And one of the things that we specialize in too is kind of customizing training. So if somebody needs a certain topic or maybe a couple of different topics around FSMA, around food safety, we'll work with them on that and we can provide customized training. So.
And especially with distribution issues and everything happening right now.
Yeah, supply chain is definitely a challenge right now. And you know, with our audits, right? Sometimes the audits are delayed. There's some difficulties with travel around that. So companies are facing a time where they have to validate for their customers what they're doing because they haven't been able to have their audit when they normally would have it. And so, you know, in the absence of being on site, customers need additional documentation or information. And so that's definitely a new challenge we're facing. And so anyway, interesting times right now.
Definitely. And you contributed an article on HACCP planning and the 12 steps. Can you go into that a little bit for our viewers?
Sure. So if I can, maybe just briefly talk about what HACCP is. So HACCP is an internationally recognized approach to food safety. It's been around for many years, and it actually started back in the late 50s. The kind of the seeds for HACCP were planted back then with the space program, believe it or not. So NASA was working with Pillsbury and the U.S. Army back then, and it's evolved over the years. And it's definitely a customer-driven program largely, but there are also some HACCP regulations for specific industries. So it is a process. It's not about documentation. A lot of people think about it as a binder on the shelf, a document that I have to have for my customer, but it really is a process. It's how you do business, how you manage things, what it's intended to be. And HACCP is different for every company. So that's one of the things is it's an approach, right? It's not a requirement that you do specific activities. It's more of an approach around how you manage food safety. So some companies may require, for instance, a metal detector, while others may need to pasteurize a fluid, but they don't need a metal detector. So it looks different for every company. And HACCP really is the foundation for these customer-driven audits that we call GFSI as well. So all of these higher level audits really are, I like to say they're HACCP plus. They're based on HACCP. So that's kind of a little bit about HACCP. Briefly about the 12 steps of HACCP, what the process is, so that people who are maybe beginners to this kind of get an idea of what it means. And you know, I still remember starting out fresh out of college in the food industry and hearing about this thing called HACCP. I didn't even know how to spell it right. I put S's in it, as you can see on the screen. There are no S's in HACCP. But I was really interested when I heard about it at first, and so I started learning about it early on in my career, and it ended up becoming an important part of what I do today. So kind of dive in here into what the 12 steps are. So these are the first 5. These are the preliminary steps of HACCP. Right, so the very first thing that you have to do is put together a HACCP team. So it is a team approach. It's a team activity. And if you think about it, you know, if you've got a big project at your house or at work, and you're going to do it on your own, it makes it a lot harder. Right? And so the idea really is to get a team together, to work together on it. It makes the process easier and it makes it better too. So having somebody from maintenance involved, somebody from production, from quality / food safety involved in this process, working together, really ends up with a much better outcome, a much better plan with different perspectives involved. So then we jump in and we kind of describe what we're doing in terms of what food we're producing, who we're going to sell it to, and that's steps 2 and 3. So as an example, a 50-pound bag of rice is going to be a whole lot different than baby food that's made from rice, for instance, right? So the food safety controls, the hazards we need to think about are going to be very different. Some of the reasons for that is the 50-pound bag of rice that's being shipped to another food company is going for further processing. It's still raw. It's going to be cooked. Right? Whereas that baby food, boy, that better be really safe and ready to eat because those babies are even more sensitive than you and I as far as food safety goes. So, so that's important for HACCP. Then we develop a flow diagram, and the reason for this is really we need to understand what our process looks like and remember all the steps of the process. And so we're going to use this flow diagram later for our hazard analysis. So if we miss a step, then our hazard analysis is going to have a missing step that we didn't think about, that we didn't analyze the hazards for. So then we verify the flow diagram. And what that means is you go out and you walk the floor and make sure that your process flow diagram is accurate. And I've done a number of audits where I've been in and looked at their flow diagram. We take a copy and we walk out on the production floor and we realize there are a couple of steps missing. Maybe some of the processing steps are out of order, or they didn't note that there's a water input to the process or something like that. And that's what that verification is for, to make sure it's accurate. So if you're not walking out on the floor, making sure your process flow diagram is accurate, then you may miss something. Okay. So now after the first 5 steps, the preliminary tasks, we jump into the principles of HACCP. So these are the core principles that were around even before those first 5 steps. And so the first one is conducting a hazard analysis. And so in this hazard analysis, we're going to look at all of our process steps, as I said just a moment ago. We're also going to look at all of our ingredients. As you can imagine, if you're buying spices from overseas, if you're buying bags of rice, from 100 miles away, if you're purchasing nuts or fruit or fresh produce, all of these things have different potential food safety hazards or issues that we need to manage. And that's not to say that our suppliers are bad and that there are hazards in there, but we need to do this assessment of, okay, inherent to avocados, inherent to rice, inherent to tomato sauce, or whatever I'm purchasing, what are the potential risks? All right, and this is the onus that the food companies have on them to say, okay, what is the potential risk? And then they decide how they're going to control that risk. And maybe they've already got a great supplier control program. Maybe they're already doing laboratory testing on products when they come in. So maybe that hazard is actually really well controlled already, and they don't really need to concern themselves too much as long as they continue doing these best practices that they're currently doing. But when things aren't quite under control, right, when there's still a potential hazard, what we find is that we need what we call a CCP, or a critical control point. So out of the hazard analysis, we identify maybe 1, 2, or 3 CCPs. What are those key control points, like pasteurization or cooking process, metal detection or X-ray for foreign materials, or filtering or screening liquid product, right, to take out any foreign materials. This is why we have really robust food safety programs in place, really, is taking this approach so that when you open that soda, when you open that bottle of wine, and you take a drink, you don't end up with a piece of glass or some kind of a chemical hazard that you're swallowing. So, I mean, these are important things. And I mean, we all kind of assume that when we buy something from the grocery store that we're going to feed to our kids or our family, that it's going to be safe, right? I mean, that's kind of an inherent, assumption that we all have, and we hope that it's true. And so as producers in the food industry, I think we all recognize the great responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that happens. So once we identify these CCPs, as we call them, we need to set a critical limit, which basically means, how do we know the CCP is under control? So if we're going to pasteurize, right, we've got temperature and time that we've got to control, or flow rate of the liquid going through the pasteurizer. If you think about kind of the idea of pasteurizing milk, for instance, right? So we establish these critical limits that tell us, is it in control or out of control? And even if you look at the image on the slide there, right, we've got a kind of a green area and a red area. We say, boy, the needle's in the red area, we're in trouble, right? That's kind of the idea here, is just to be able to look at this CCP and immediately be able to tell whether it's in control or not. So once we've established the critical limit, somebody's got to keep an eye on it, right? So we're monitoring the CCP. We've got somebody taking a look and saying, yes, it's in control, or hey, we've got a problem here. We need to stop the line, we need to hold product, call maintenance, something like this, right? So that's what a monitoring system is for. And so especially trained individuals on site do this monitoring activity, right? We have to make sure that we train them on what to look for, right? So we're not going to hire somebody off the street and say, hey, go watch that machine, right? We've got to make sure they're trained and know what to look for. And so as they're monitoring them, sometimes things go wrong, hopefully not too often, right? But when things do go wrong, we need to plan out what we're going to do. So we have these things called corrective actions. And so these corrective actions need to be in place for employees to follow when something does go wrong. And that includes things like documenting what happened, putting product on hold, as I said earlier, calling maintenance, calling management, and taking whatever steps are appropriate that we've decided ahead of time, right? Because we don't want people deciding kind of on the fly what they think is the right thing to do. Okay, so that's what corrective actions are about. Verification procedures then are the next principle, principle 6, or the 11th step of HACCP. And so this is really, really important for food safety. So having that second set of eyes, right? I mean, having somebody else look at that record that we completed, coming along behind and checking the process to make sure that we didn't miss something. Because, I mean, let's face it, we're all human, right? We've had those days where we woke up late and didn't have time to drink coffee or whatever. You know, and so it's really, really important when it's food safety that somebody else is there keeping an eye on checking things as well, kind of double checking. They do the same thing in the aircraft industry, right? They've got checks and double checks because, gosh, we don't want to have a problem up in the air at 30,000 feet. So same thing with food. And then finally, the last principle is documentation, right? This is procedures, written processes that we follow. This is also keeping good records, right? And records are there for a number of reasons. I mean, so you and I can go back and we can check those records to see what happened internally, to verify that everything happened appropriately. Customer contacts us and says, hey, I found metal, I found glass in my product. We go and we double check all of our records and make sure we did everything right, because sometimes we get valid complaints. Sometimes, you know, there are occasions where customers will complain and they just want to get a discount, or they don't know which supplier the problem came from because they've already made the finished good and then they found the problem. So we need to have good records for those purposes as well. And ultimately, you know, because food safety is something that is regulated by the FDA, right? There's a regulatory requirement there. These become legal records, right? I mean, hopefully none of our listeners will ever have this happen, but you can end up facing a lawsuit. You can end up in court. You can end up with FDA taking legal actions, and these records become so important in those cases. We've got to have good records to prove that we've done our due diligence. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, so to speak, the 12 steps of HACCP and what that's all about. So hopefully that kind of helps answer viewers' questions about the process. So,
and a lot of people, when they think about HACCP, they think it's just the documentation, which is really the last step. And you explain that it's definitely a process and making sure that everybody can properly meet the regulations that they need to meet.
yeah, definitely. And it's so important to maintain food safety and to maintain that high level of commitment on site, and make sure that everybody understands, right, that their role in this process, right? Because you definitely don't know. I may be dating myself a little bit, but I saw episodes of Laverne and Shirley as a kid, and of course, you know, they were something where they were you know, reruns that were playing on TV. But I remember this scene at the beginning of Laverne and Shirley where they worked in a bottling plant. It was a beer bottling plant, and these bottles are going by, and they're supposed to be checking the bottles, but they're clearly not really bought into the process. They don't really care. They're not really doing their job very well. And at the end of their shift, they grab their gloves, they put them on top of a couple of bottles and let them go down the line. And we definitely don't want Laverne and Shirley syndrome in our food plants. We want everybody to consider this a top priority. So yeah, so food safety is definitely very important. And we've got some interesting things coming down the pike. I don't know if you want me to talk about those things that are coming up now.
Yeah, some updates to the article that you already contributed would be great.
Yeah. So so one of the things, I think I've already kind of alluded to this, but food safety is definitely not a one and done process, right? We have to continue to maintain our programs. And so if you think about it, things have changed a lot just from the 1900s when we started implementing food safety regulations in the early 1900s till now. And in the future, things are going to be different as well. And so some of the newer things that are happening, greater supply chain complexity, right? We have a global supply chain for sure now. And so we need to understand where our suppliers are, where our products are coming from. And that requires greater scrutiny than ever. And then also we've got kind of elevated expectations from customers and from regulators. And part of the reason is the changes that are happening. And we've got to make sure we meet those expectations. You know, we've got new expectations that we're held to. Analytical methods are changing. So we have new things that can be tested for in the lab. We have things that can be tested to a more sensitive level now in the lab. And so one example of that is something called aflatoxin that is found in grains or nuts sometimes, if mold has grown on those things. And in the past, they set the criteria for aflatoxin at, did we find it or not? Did we detect it or was it non-detect? But when more sensitive tests came out, we had to start setting safe limits because we could test it down to such a sensitive level that half of the food products out there could be rejected. So things evolve, they get more sensitive, and things have to be changed in terms of limits and in terms of our programs. So HACCP really, I think, is something that will continue to be an expectation. It's not going away, but it's going to evolve over time. And keeping a balanced perspective between HACCP and food safety regulations like FSMA. So the FDA has this Food Safety Modernization Act, as it's called. And it kind of interfaces, so to speak, with HACCP. The two are very similar, but they're a little different. And so we've got to keep that in mind as well. And really HACCP is intended to be a very thorough process as a methodology. As I said earlier, we've got to look at every step, every ingredient, and make sure that we're looking at that. But now with our greater supply chain complexities, that includes things like food fraud. So have you heard about food fraud, Tara? Have you been hearing news stories on this at all? Are you familiar with the term?
I know that sometimes food can be replaced with another ingredient and passed off as being that food when it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we see a lot of food fraud out there now, and some of it is just to make money. So we have, you know, vegetable oil mixed in with extra virgin olive oil. That's not necessarily harmful in and of itself, although it is illegal. But we're very concerned when things start being mixed in that are allergens or that have a chemical hazard, right? And so any kind of a supplier that's being dishonest in this way, you know, is a concern. And one quick example, in a couple of years past, a supplier of cumin had mixed in some peanut shells with the cumin as they were grinding it. And ground products like spices that are ground up into a fine powder are definitely something that is at higher risk of food fraud because you can throw things in there when you grind it. Well, these peanut shells had peanut protein in them. And as we know, people have some extreme allergies to peanuts, and this ended up being a problem. So we were recalling cumin off the shelf, but not only cumin, we're talking about dry rubs, barbecue sauces, frozen meals, all kinds of stuff has cumin in it. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. Also radiological hazards. We're concerned with that now because things can be shipped from areas of the world where there have been radiological incidents, meltdowns, but there are also places where the soil or the water actually has a radiological hazard in it as well. So again, that's another thing that some processors have to deal with, as well as environmental hazards in their processing environment. Meaning, and we're seeing more and more of this, honestly, in recalls, is things like, oh, well, we found listeria in the processing environment, and so we need to recall our products, right? Or we found E. coli or salmonella on our equipment or something like this. And even though we didn't find it in the products, there's a potential that it could be in there. So processors are having to apply a lot more due diligence now to even things like floor drains or checking the walls, the floors, the equipment, the ceilings. If you think about it, a ceiling, right? If you've got condensation, it's going to drip down on your product potentially, right? So it's definitely a new world these days, and we've got to think outside the box a little bit from what HACCP looked like maybe 20 years ago.
Whereas like we've seen that it hasn't proven that COVID can be passed through food products yet, but with listeria and other bacteria, you want to definitely make sure that your packaging process is clean. So
yeah, for sure. And that's an important thing to note too. So thanks for bringing that up is, yeah, number one, that COVID, there's no evidence that it transfers via food. You know, it's really an inhalation hazard. And, the way I look at it, food companies already have a lot of great processes in place when they're doing all the right things, like we talked about with HACCP, such that the risk really should be fairly low for most processors. We have seen some incidents in the meat industry where a lot of employees were getting sick. And even with those, right, there were no illnesses traced back to the food products. So that's good news. But yeah, new packaging technologies, even there could be a pathogen risk. But even aside from pathogens, could there be a chemical risk, right, from the packaging itself? And so processors have to make sure they're buying food grade packaging, or if we've got kind of a modified atmosphere situation, as we call it, where they're putting nitrogen or carbon dioxide in the packaging, what does that mean in terms of food safety? Are there new hazards now because of that bacteria that might grow in there that wouldn't have otherwise grown, or other things we haven't thought about? So yeah, it's definitely, often it involves engineering as well when we're doing something like that, building a new process or implementing new technology.
And if our viewers wanted to get in contact with you or Safe Food Alliance to have help with forming their HACCP process, how would they reach you?
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for mentioning that. So our website is at safefoodalliance.com. It's all one word. And we'd be happy to help. We offer a lot of custom programs, as I mentioned, not just training, but also consulting. We can do it virtually. So a lot of companies are concerned with bringing visitors on site. There's a lot we can do virtually now, especially in terms of your documented programs, but even some in terms of on-site, looking around the facility using a camera. We've had some cases where we've done that as well. Another nice thing about the virtual platform is it can be more cost effective. There are no travel costs, and we can just carve out a couple of hours here or there for the smaller companies. And so if they don't have a big budget yet and they're still getting started, a few hours here or there can still be a big help to companies. So so safefoodalliance.com is where you want to go. You can also find, we have a lot of virtual training coming up. We also have our academy, we call it. We have self-paced courses. And so any kind of training you need, HACCP, the Food Safety Modernization Act, food safety culture, sanitation training. We've got a lot of different subjects.
Well, thank you for joining me today, John. And I will make sure to link the website and a little more information about Safe Food Alliance. And I look forward to working with you again.
Great. Thank you for your time, and thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Make sure to reach out to Safe Food Alliance at safefoodalliance.com and visit their food safety center in Kingsburg, California to have help with the HACCP plan or the other 360-degree food safety services that they provide. Our other sponsor is Dynamic Coatings Incorporated. They have fast curing antimicrobial and concrete sealants, and they are FDA, USDA, and OSHA compliant. They have urethanes, epoxies, even drains. So make sure to reach out to them at their Fresno, Sacramento, Los Angeles, or Oakland locations. My next guests are Stephen Young and Hung Duan of MycoKind. They are the co-founders. Check them out at mycokind.com. And Stephen, Huang?
Hi, Tara. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you for joining. Can you give our viewers and listeners a little background about yourselves and MycoKind?
Yeah, absolutely. So MycoKind was started in 2018 of July with the premise of three friends just getting together and discovering and kind of making something out of our passion for fungi and mushrooms.
And give a little background about your guys' experience and why you guys are experts in mycology.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. So I did my PhD in food science and technology, specifically in nutraceuticals and processing. But one of the systems that I looked at very extensively was fungi, specifically yeast. So that's kind of my expertise in food systems and yeast and mycology.
Yeah. So I did my my master and my PhD in plant pathology working with fungi as a disease-causing organism on plants. But throughout my degree, I also work with a lot of mushroom poisoning, mushroom cultivation, basically mushroom identification and such. So fungi has been with me since 2010, 2011.
And the other co-founder, Brian Chow, he has his master's in food systems and society. And he looked at lowering the barrier of entry into participate in the food industry. And one of the things he was really interested in is looking at using fungi to lower as a good opportunity for new markets.
And what's something that you wish more people knew about mycology?
You want to go first, or Steven, or?
You go first.
Okay, so for me, fungi has been with humankind since the beginning of time. Basically, fungi shapes human, and fungi are more closely related to human than to plants. So fungi, we've been using fungi throughout our history, and then fungi has been shaping our history, vice versa. So there's an intertwined deep relationship between human and fungi in almost every culture, basically.
And something that I probably would want people to learn more about mycology is that what it can do to shape our future. So mushrooms are not only just for food, they can also be used for microremediation, which is cleaning up the environment. They can be used to make, in some cases, furniture, which is a very odd thing, but it's very interesting. So you can actually make furniture, hats. They can degrade plastics. They are just so interesting and so useful. And I don't think we're quite utilizing them enough now. So I want people to learn more about mycology in general and see what is out there for the use of fungi in the future.
And I know your company is more focused on the science and mixing it with the tradition because fungi have been part of society since the beginning. You guys are looking to kind of change how it's being used and using it more smartly, especially for the food systems.
Yeah. So we're basically moving. So fungi has been with us through history, but we're moving it with technology this day, and with more problem that arise this day with, like, for example, environmental problem, like Stephen mentioned. So we want to further utilize fungi and explore the depth of fungal diversity and use that, see how fungi can help us shape and future problem and help solve those future problems basically as well.
And what are some projects that your company has worked on recently?
Yeah, so I can answer that. One of the things that we've really been interested in is myceliated grains. And effectively what that does is it's a grain product that has been inoculated with mushrooms. So what it does is it reduces simple sugars and starches and actually adds a fiber and protein to the content of the grain. In addition to that, it also increases B vitamin content and gives things such as ergosterols, which is depending on which kind you're looking at, is a precursor for vitamin D. And there's beta glucans, which are known for anti-inflammatory properties that are extensively in two sources mainly. That would be wheat germ, and mushrooms.
So you're improving the nutritional value of the grains by impacting it with mycelium.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, the medicinal fungi produce a lot of secondary metabolite on top of those that are good for your health. For example, oyster has compound that can lower your cholesterol, for example. So this fungal cell wall is really good for good dietary fiber itself, but also a bunch of other health benefit. That's good for you basically if you consume more. So that's our project.
Yeah, and it might sound odd to incorporate mushrooms into grains, but mushrooms have so many varied flavors and aromas and tastes and textures. So there's mushrooms that taste like seafood. There's mushrooms that actually taste like maple syrup. So if you want to incorporate this kind of myceliated grain into your product, you can actually use a maple syrup flavored mushroom and still incorporate some of these health benefits and reduce the starch content and the simple sugar content.
And I know there's such a large diversity of mushrooms, and it's going to be like choosing your favorite kid, but what are your favorite mushrooms?
Awesome. Yeah, I have a couple. The one that I was talking about earlier there that actually tastes like maple is endemic to California and Oregon. So you can actually go outside in the redwood forest and find them. They're called candy caps. And as soon as you put them onto a hot surface, or even if you pick them and smell your fingers, it smells exactly like maple. And it's scary how awesome they taste and how awesome they smell. And I also love the texture. There's one specific mushroom I love the texture of. It's the wood ear or black fungus. And I'm from the South, so I eat weird things, if you will. And one of the things we eat are like pig ear or pig snout. And if you cook them, you can cook them similarly to that, and they'll have just that same texture, and it's just awesome. But it's a vegan source of that texture that I loved growing up.
So, what is a project that you're looking forward to doing in the future? Or what kind of projects would you want to work on?
Steven?
Yeah, so we're interested in pretty much building a community of people who are interested in mushrooms. So we want to, at some point, this is more of a Brian question because this is what he was really, really, really adamant about doing his master's work on, is developing food systems where we can incorporate mushrooms into products at lower cost than meats. So kind of not necessarily exactly alternative meat sources, but in a similar vein and similar thought. So we would have cheaper, more affordable products that have protein in them, which also taste great.
And if our viewers and listeners want to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Absolutely. So you can go to we have our website you can go to, which is michaelkind.com. We also have a LinkedIn, Twitter, if I'm not mistaken, Facebook, all the social medias, or you can send us an email directly, either at my email, or you can, which is syoung@michaelkind.com or info@michaelkind.com.
Well, thank you for joining me today, gentlemen. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close for today?
No, thank you so much, Tara, for having us today.
Thank you for having us. Yes.
Thank you. Have
Just
a good
one.
weekend.
Actually, one more fun
Yes.
fact. There's actually that Steven mentioned about the candy caps, the one that smell like maple.
Mhm.
There's one that smell exactly like garlic, and if you're in the forest and you step on it, there'll be a nice fragrance of garlic all around you. So
So mushrooms are fun. Fungi are fun.
Well, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
you too.
You too. Bye-bye.
Reach out to our sponsor, Fine Print Plus. They're your source for printing, packing, and promotion. You can get 500 free business cards with purchase for new customers. They do graphic design, prints and copies, custom apparel, promotional items, parcel services, and will call and deliveries. You can reach them at 559-237-4747 or email them at graphics@fineprintplus.com or request a quote through their website, fineprintplus.com/quote. Another one of our sponsors is Valley Will Call. They do industrial pickup and delivery services. They're serving the greater Fresno area. They are a Darren Gibbs industrial company. You can reach out at contact@valleywillcall.com or call them at 559-312-4544 or contact Darren Gibbs directly at 559-351-3280 or email him at contact@darrengibbs.com. And now we will have a moment of silence for our Black Lives Matter community.